High noon, September 12, 1962. The sun hung directly overhead, casting no shadows on Clayton Street in Richmond, Virginia. A black Cadillac pulled up to Myers' Diner, a whites-only establishment that had stood on that corner for 37 years without ever serving a single black customer. The engine cut, the door opened, and Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stepped onto the sidewalk, wearing a charcoal gray suit that had seen better days, and carrying something far more dangerous than any weapon: quiet, unshakable dignity. The sign in the window was explicit, white lettering on red background: "We reserve the right to refuse service." Everyone knew what that meant. In 1962 Richmond, those words weren't a suggestion. They were a threat backed by police, by courts, by the full weight of Jim Crow's machinery. Breaking that barrier didn't just mean getting refused service. It meant violence, arrest, disappearance. It meant your name in the newspaper the next morning with words like troublemaker and agitator attached to it forever. But Bumpy Johnson hadn't driven 7 hours from Harlem to turn around because of a sign. See, what most people didn't understand about Bumpy was that he'd spent 40 years mastering power in a world designed to strip him of it. In Harlem, he built an empire through intelligence, patience, and an almost supernatural ability to read 3 moves ahead. He'd survived Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, the Genovese family. He'd done time in Alcatraz and walked out with his reputation intact. He'd negotiated with mayors, made police commissioners sweat, and built a network that stretched from 110th Street to the Apollo Theater. And he'd done it all while white America pretended he didn't exist. That's what made him dangerous. Not guns, not violence, the calm, calculating certainty that he was owed respect and the willingness to claim it, consequences be damned. Inside Myers' Diner, 17 customers sat at red leather booths and chrome-topped tables, working men mostly. A few businessmen in cheap suits. 2 police officers at the counter, nursing coffee and discussing the upcoming football season. Waitress named Dorothy working the floor, 53 years old, 26 years at Myers, never once served anyone who wasn't white. The owner, Harold Meyer, stood behind the register, counting receipts. The kitchen staff, 2 cooks, 1 dishwasher worked in the back, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filling the air. Normal Tuesday lunch rush, predictable. Safe, the kind of afternoon where nothing ever happened. Then the door opened. The bell above it chimed. 17 heads turned. Conversations didn't stop immediately. They died in stages. First, the table nearest the door went quiet. Then the next. Then the police officer's discussion about Virginia Techs. The quarterback trailed off mid-sentence. Within 5 seconds, Myers' Diner had gone from comfortable Tuesday afternoon noise to the kind of silence that precedes violence. Bumpy stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds, not moving, not speaking. Just present, his eyes swept the room with the same calm assessment he'd used in Harlem back rooms, counting guns, identifying exits, reading the temperature of potential threats. 17 white faces staring back at him with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to barely contained fury. He walked to a booth by the window, second from the front, sat down with his back to the wall. Old habit from decades of staying alive in rooms full of people who wanted him dead. He folded his hands on the table, and he waited. Dorothy stood frozen near the kitchen, her order pad shaking slightly in her hand. She looked at Harold Meyer. He looked at the 2 police officers. One of them, a thick-necked man named Officer Daniels, slowly stood up from his stool at the counter. His hand moved to his belt, not quite touching his gun but making sure everyone noticed it was there. Bumpy didn't look at him. His eyes stayed forward, focused on the menu board above the counter. Meatloaf Special, $1.25, came with mashed potatoes and green beans. Officer Daniels approached the booth, his boots heavy on the checkered floor. When he reached the table, his voice came out exactly as expected, that particular combination of false politeness and barely veiled threat that Southern law enforcement had perfected over generations. "Boy, you lost." Bumpy's eyes moved from the menu board to the officer's face. The silence stretched out. 3 seconds. 5. Long enough to make Daniels shift his weight uncomfortably. When Bumpy finally spoke, his voice was quiet, conversational, utterly devoid of fear. "I'm exactly where I intend to be. This is a private establishment. We reserve the right to refuse." "I can read," Bumpy interrupted gently. "I've been reading since I was 4 years old. I read the sign, I read the menu. Now I'm waiting to order." The officer's jaw tightened. His hand moved closer to his gun. "You're gonna have to leave." "I don't think so." Something in the way Bumpy said it, calm, matter-of-fact, final, made Officer Daniels hesitate. This wasn't the response he was used to. Usually, black folks in Richmond either left immediately or got angry enough to justify arrest. Bumpy was doing neither. He was just sitting, waiting, with an expression that suggested he had all the time in the world and no intention of going anywhere. The second officer, younger, nervous, approached from behind. "Sir, you're trespassing. If you don't leave, we'll have to arrest you." "For what?" Bumpy's voice remained conversational. "Sitting in a diner, being hungry? Which specific law am I breaking right now?" Harold Meyer had come out from behind the register. He was sweating, despite the air conditioning. His diner had been in his family for 3 generations. Never had a problem. Never had controversy. Just served food to white customers and stayed out of the integration battles happening in other cities. That's how you survived in business. You didn't make waves. But now, this man, this calm, gray-suited man who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from surviving things Harold Meyer couldn't imagine, was sitting in his booth, making his customers uncomfortable, putting his livelihood at risk. "I'm asking you politely to leave," Meyer said, trying to sound reasonable. "This isn't. We don't serve colored here. That's just how it is." "How it is," Bumpy repeated softly, as if testing the phrase. "See, I've been hearing that particular excuse my entire life. That's just how it is. White folks have been telling me how it is since I was 6 years old getting chased out of a park in North Carolina. That's just how it is. They told me that when I couldn't attend the school 3 blocks from my house, when I couldn't drink from the fountain downtown, when I couldn't sit at the front of the bus, when I couldn't walk into a voting booth, that's just how it is." He paused, let the silence build. When he continued, his voice had dropped even quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. "But here's what I've learned in 60 years on this earth. How it is only stays how it is as long as people accept it. The moment someone says no, that's not how it's going to be anymore, everything changes." Dorothy had moved closer, drawn by the strange electricity in the air. She'd served thousands of customers over 26 years, had mastered the art of being invisible, of serving food without making eye contact, of moving through rooms without leaving an impression. But something about this moment felt different, historic even. She found herself speaking before she realized she'd decided to. What would you like to order?" Every head in the diner turned to look at her. Harold Meyer's eyes went wide. Officer Daniels actually took a step back, shocked. The younger officer's hand moved to his radio. But Dorothy kept her eyes on Bumpy, waiting. Bumpy's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe respect. He glanced at the menu board again. "Meatloaf special," he said quietly. "Coffee black." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The diner had become a tableau, everyone frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Harold Meyer looked at Dorothy like she'd lost her mind. Officer Daniels' face had gone red, with barely controlled anger. Several customers were halfway out of their booths, ready to leave or cause trouble, unclear which. Dorothy's hand shook as she wrote down the order, but she wrote it down. Harold Meyer found his voice. "Dorothy, don't you dare." "Been working here 26 years, Harold," Dorothy said quietly, not looking at him. "Never once disobeyed you. But I'm taking this man's order. You'll lose your job? Then I'll lose it." Her voice was steady now. "But I'm not refusing to serve a paying customer who's sitting here peacefully just because of the color of his skin. Not today. Not anymore." She walked to the kitchen, clipped the order to the wheel. And just like that, the machinery of discrimination encountered something it hadn't expected. One individual making a different choice. The younger officer grabbed his radio. "We've got a situation at Meyer's Diner, requesting backup for potential disturbance." But Bumpy still hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't done anything except sit calmly in a booth and order lunch. What exactly were they going to arrest him for? Being present? The law was on their side. Technically, Virginia's segregation statutes were still in force in 1962 despite the mounting pressure from civil rights movements, but actually dragging a well-dressed, peaceful man out of a diner in front of witnesses at high noon. That played differently, especially when that man wasn't resisting, wasn't causing a disturbance, was just sitting. Officer Daniels leaned down close to Bumpy's ear, voice low and threatening. "You think you're smart? You think this is gonna work? We'll arrest you. We'll beat you. We'll make sure you regret ever walking through that door." Bumpy turned his head slowly to look directly at the officer. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but carried complete certainty. "I've been beaten by experts. I've been arrested by better cops than you. I've spent time in Alcatraz. You know where that is, officer. Maximum security federal prison. Compared to that, your Richmond jail is a vacation. So if you think threats scare me, you don't understand who you're dealing with." He turned back to face forward. "Now I've ordered my lunch. I intend to eat it, and when I'm finished, I'll pay my bill and leave peacefully. What happens between now and then is entirely up to you." The door chimed again. 3 more police officers entered, called by the radio request. The situation was escalating exactly as Harold Meyer had feared. His diner, which had operated peacefully for 37 years, was becoming the site of a potential riot. Customers were leaving now, nervous about being present when violence erupted. One man threw money on his table and rushed out without finishing his meal. 2 more followed, but others stayed, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of something deeper, a sense that they were witnessing something important. A moment when the old order began to crack. In the kitchen, the head cook, a man named James, who'd worked at Myers for 14 years, looked at Dorothy's order slip. He could refuse to make it. He could tell Harold he wasn't cooking for coloreds, that it violated everything they'd always done. But he'd served in World War II, had fought alongside black soldiers in France who saved his life during the Battle of the Bulge, had shared foxholes with men who couldn't eat in the same diners back home. The contradiction had never sit right with him, but he'd pushed it down, accepted how it is. He started cooking the meatloaf special. The senior police officer who'd just arrived, a captain named Wilson, surveyed the situation. He'd been on the force for 23 years, had broken up integration attempts before, but something about this felt different. The man in the booth wasn't part of a protest group, wasn't carrying signs, wasn't making speeches. He was just having lunch. Or trying to. Captain Wilson pulled Officer Daniels aside. "We arrest him for what, exactly? Sitting peacefully, trespassing, disturbing the peace. He hasn't disturbed anything. He's sitting quietly. The disturbance is everyone's reaction to him sitting quietly." Wilson rubbed his face. "You drag him out. It's gonna be in tomorrow's papers. Pictures of cops manhandling a peaceful man. You know what's happening in Birmingham, in Montgomery. The whole country's watching. You want Richmond to be the next headline? so we just let him stay. I'm saying, think about what you're doing. Think about how it looks. While the police debated, Dorothy brought out the coffee. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She set the cup down in front of Bumpy with a small nod. He thanked her quietly. He picked up the cup and took a sip. The simple act of drinking coffee at a diner booth shouldn't have felt revolutionary. But in that moment, in that place, it was. Every person in Meyer's diner understood they were watching something fundamental. Shift the old rules, that's just how it is, were being quietly, calmly rejected by one man's refusal to accept them. Harold Meyer stood behind his register, watching his carefully maintained world crack. He could call the police, but they were already here, uncertain what to do. He could physically remove Bumpy himself, but something about the man's calm dignity made that seem impossible. He could close the diner, declare an emergency, but that felt like surrender. So he did nothing. And in doing nothing, he allowed something new to happen. The meatloaf special came out 12 minutes later. James had cooked it exactly the same way he cooked every meatloaf special. Seasoned well. Served hot, with extra gravy on the side. Dorothy brought it to the booth. Set it down. Bumpy thanked her again, picked up his fork, and began eating lunch at a whites-only diner at high noon on a Tuesday in Richmond, Virginia. Several customers who'd stayed were watching openly now. A few looked angry. A few looked confused. But one older woman, sitting 3 booths away, did something unexpected. She caught Dorothy's eye and quietly ordered another cup of coffee. When Dorothy brought it, the woman said, just loud enough to be heard, "Thank you for doing the right thing." Dorothy's eyes teared up. She nodded and moved back to the kitchen. Bumpy ate slowly, methodically. The meatloaf was decent. The mashed potatoes could have used more butter. The green beans were overcooked. He ate every bite, drank his coffee. When he finished, he folded his napkin, placed it aft on the plate, and gestured to Dorothy for the check. She brought it. $1.25 for the special. 10 cents for coffee. He pulled out $2 bills, placed them on the table, and stood up. The entire diner watched. The police officers tensed, hands moving toward weapons, still uncertain whether to act. Bumpy walked to the register. Harold Meyer stood there, paralyzed. Bumpy placed the money on the counter. "Keep the change," he said quietly. Then his eyes moved to the window, to the sign. "You might want to take that down. Times are changing, Mr. Meyer. You can change with them, or you can get left behind. But either way, they're changing." He walked to the door, opened it. The bell chimed, and before he stepped out, he turned back to look at the room one more time. "Thank you for lunch," he said to Dorothy, to James in the kitchen, to the older woman who'd spoken up, to everyone who'd stayed and witnessed it. Was appreciated. Then he was gone. The Cadillac started, pulled away from the curb, and Meyer's diner sat in stunned silence. Officer Daniels started toward the door. "We should follow him. Run. His plates." Captain Wilson put a hand on his shoulder. "Let it go." But he had lunch. That's all he did. He ordered food, ate it, paid for it, and left peacefully. "You want to arrest a man for eating meatloaf?" The younger officer looked confused. "But the sign says—" "I know what the sign says," Wilson interrupted. His voice was tired. "I know what it says." Harold Meyer stood at his register, holding the $2 bills, staring at the window where the sign hung. Dorothy had disappeared into the back, crying quietly, whether from fear or relief or something else entirely. She couldn't have explained. James stood in the kitchen, looking at the empty order wheel, feeling something shift in his understanding of the world. The remaining customers slowly returned to their meals, but conversations stayed quiet, subdued. Everyone knew they'd witnessed something they'd tell their children about someday. The day the sign came down, even though technically it was still hanging in the window. But 3 days later, it wasn't. Harold Meyer arrived early Thursday morning, before opening and took down the "We reserve the right to refuse service" sign. He didn't make an announcement, didn't explain, just removed it, put it in the trash, and unlocked the door. When Dorothy arrived and noticed it was gone, she didn't say anything, just tied her apron and started setting up for the breakfast rush. When the first black customer walked in that Thursday, a nervous young woman who'd heard about what happened Tuesday, Dorothy seated her in the same booth by the window. James cooked her breakfast exactly the same way he cooked everyone else's, and Myers' Diner, which had been whites only for 37 years, served its first black customer without incident. Word spread through Richmond's black community. By the following week, Myers had a new clientele, integrated, mixed, representative of the neighborhood it actually sat in, rather than the fiction it had maintained. Some white customers stopped coming, others stayed. Business fluctuated for a few months, then stabilized. The world didn't end. The diner didn't close. Life just continued. Slightly different, slightly better. Bumpy Johnson never returned to Myers' Diner. He'd made his point. He'd claimed his dignity. Demonstrated that how it is only remains how it is until someone refuses to accept it anymore. He'd done what he'd always done, challenged power structures, forced confrontations with injustice, and won through strategic patience rather than violence. See, what happened at Myers' Diner that September afternoon wasn't about one man getting one meal. It was about power. About who has the right to occupy space, to claim service, to exist as a full human being rather than a problem to be removed. Bumpy understood that power isn't just taken through force. Sometimes the most powerful act is simply refusing to leave, sitting calmly while the world rages around you, ordering lunch like you have every right to be there, because you do. That's the thing about dignity. You can't legislate it away. You can make laws, put up signs, threaten violence, but when someone simply refuses to accept that they're less than human, when they claim space with quiet certainty, all the signs in the world become meaningless. The Civil Rights Act wouldn't pass for another 2 years. Segregation would persist in various forms for decades more. The fight for equality would continue long past 1962 through violence and sacrifice and slow, painful progress. But every significant movement is built from individual moments when someone says, "No, not anymore. This is changing right now." High noon, September 12, 1962. That was Richmond's moment. One man, one booth, one meal, and the sign came down before dessert. What would you have done in that diner that Tuesday? Would you have been Harold Meyer, paralyzed by the weight of tradition? Officer Daniels, ready to enforce unjust laws? Dorothy, shaking, but choosing courage? Or one of the customers who stayed to witness, knowing something important was happening even if they couldn't fully articulate what? The beauty of this story, the power of it, is that those choices still exist today. Different forms, different contexts, but the same fundamental question. When you see injustice, when you witness someone claiming dignity in the face of systems designed to deny it, what do you do? Bumpy Johnson answered that question at high noon in Richmond, with meatloaf, coffee, and unshakable certainty that he deserved to be treated like a human being. The sign came down, times changed, because one man refused to accept how it is. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories of courage, strategy, and quiet revolution. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in that diner? And check out our next video about the underground networks that helped integrate the American South, one strategic confrontation at a time. The fight for dignity wasn't just about marches and speeches. Sometimes it was about meatloaf specials and coffee at high noon.